Our next guest has been on with us a ton of times, but never in this capacity. We're joined at the Boston Public Library for the first time by the new Attorney General from Massachusetts, Andrea Campbell. Attorney General, it's great to have you here.
Yeah, we're very, very happy.
Attorney General Campbell will be with us till the end of the show, taking our questions and your calls. You can call her or text the question at 877-301-8970. If you're at the library and would like to ask a question or address a comment to the Attorney General, Nicole, who is sitting in the is that pink or salmon? Whatever it is, that sweater, just raise their hand. Next to her is our other colleague, Annie. If you approach either of them, we'll put you in queue. We haven't had a chance to say congratulations. Congratulations.
Yeah,
We're so glad to see
congratulations,
you.
Attorney General. Very happy, very
and
happy
people
for
are
you.
still clapping.
Yeah.
That's going to stop. Believe me, that'll stop.
So,
Keep going. Keep going. No, thank you so much for having me.
So before we get to the text and the phone calls, I want to play a little sound for you. This is Jim promoting your appearance today with the new governor of the Commonwealth, Maura Healey. Here it is.
The new Attorney General, Andrea Campbell, will make her first visit for Ask the Attorney General on February 14th. Am I correct? February 14th.
Valentine's Day.
And the mayor will be with us
Not
at 1:30.
a better way to spend Valentine's Day than with you, Jim.
You know, speaking of... You and nobody
sure
else
that's what
feels
you're
that way.
thinking.
Thank you. It's a
Yes.
beautiful spirit.
Well, we did want to ask if that's kind of one of your dream days, is to spend Valentine's Day with Jim Browdy.
Yeah.
With both of you, and of course the folks in the audience, happy
Nice
Valentine's
evasion,
Day.
Thank you.
by the way. There.
Happy Valentine's Day.
We have some
Valentine's
chocolates
Day to
there
you.
from
I
the
brought
Attorney
some
General.
chocolates.
You did?
Yes, she did.
Yes,
I'm very happy.
And apparently you need it because someone's off on the floor trying to eat lunch.
No.
But yes,
That I was munching
you.
out of my
Oh,
lunch.
but
She
no,
meant
I'm
like a
happy to be
rodent.
here. Happy to be here.
We're thrilled to have you, Attorney General.
So, Attorney General, let's start with basically how it's been. I mean, you've been there for just, well, how many days now? About a month?
About a month.
You know, what's it been like? Any surprises? Anything you didn't expect? What's it been like?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be remiss, you know, as we're sitting here, I'm taking in the coverage of Michigan State and the shooting, of course, in Michigan State. And I've been 4 weeks essentially 4 weeks or a month on the job. And, you know, we had Tyree Nichols, obviously the horrific beating and murder of Tyree Nichols, the Duxbury murder, the Andover case, the 13-year-old shot and killed in Mattapan, where I live, Michigan State, obviously, and it's 5 years since Parkland. So there are moments it's been really heavy, but I'm not going to have an entire radio appearance where I'm sort of doom and gloom. I will say the best thing about my job, and I just told the governor this last night, I have the best job in the Commonwealth, I just do, is that I get to go into an office to work with incredible attorneys and staff who are passionate about public service, passionate about helping people to really do something to address gun violence, to address racism, police accountability, and so much more. So it's a blessing, and it's been wonderful and exciting. And I started my day today, Valentine's Day, with my oldest son, who is 5, at his school in Dorchester, which is a Boston public school, and that was really amazing.
Hold on, did you have to make out like 50 cards for the kids for Valentine's Day? Everybody has to do that.
We did cards over the weekend together, and he wrote his name, and it's Alexander, and so he wrote, and then finally he said, my hand is hurting, can you help me write my name? But no, it was wonderful, and they have a Valentine's Day ball, so I'll be there tonight at the Valentine's Day ball.
Neat.
But no, I have the best job in the world, and it's amazing.
Well, I want to pick up on what you said, and it is the 5th anniversary, unfortunately, Valentine's Day 5 years ago, Parkland. You talk about how much you care about these issues. That is equaled by how little the Supreme Court cares about these issues, as evidenced by their decision in this gun case out of New York, where they basically said Wild West is fine with us. There's a lot of concern. I'm among the concerned people, I assume Marjorie is too, as to what that Supreme Court decision and potentially future decisions could do to our solid and common sense gun laws in this country. I know that you filed friend of the court briefs in a number of cases challenging some of the stuff here, but how worried are you about the state of our laws with that Supreme Court?
Yeah, so the Supreme Court obviously going in the wrong direction when it comes to our gun laws, reproductive justice, and the environment, and so much more. I will say a couple of things. We should all feel really lucky and blessed that we live in Massachusetts because we have codified so many laws and have significant precedent here to protect us. You know, assault weapons ban, making sure there are not guns that are sold that have defects, you name it. And so in addition to joining other states and making sure we're protected and protecting our common sense gun laws, we are actually taking direct action in our office and filing a couple of briefs since I've started against challenges from folks who are a bit extreme in trying to take away these protections to keep our laws on the books. And I'm confident that with that advocacy and fierce and bold advocacy that we will continue to be fine here. But everyone should be concerned. At the end of the day, reminding folks, whether it's Supreme Court appointments or folks in Congress who aren't moving fast enough to respond to the issues and the pressing issues of today, they get there because people either vote or they don't vote. So we have an opportunity to play a role in that. And so I encourage folks to continue that advocacy as well.
So, you know, we didn't intend to get into these things till later, but since you brought them up, you talked about reproductive freedom, which obviously is being impinged upon, which is the understatement of the century, by this duplicitous Supreme Court. And I say duplicitous because what they said in their confirmation hearings and what they did in a number of cases were different. There's an individual federal court judge appointed by Trump in Texas who has spent virtually his whole career trying to undermine civil rights, particularly women's civil rights or reproductive freedom. It is believed that is roughly by February 24th, he is likely to rule that pills for medical abortions are not only illegal in Texas, but illegal in the whole United States. Assuming that outcome is the outcome, and let's hope it's not, of course, what do you do as Attorney General here in Massachusetts?
So a few things, but actually before I even get to the issue of abortion and reproductive health care, quickly on the guns,
Sure.
It is because we've been in office, and I say we, I don't work alone. I have an incredible team of folks, close to 600 folks in the office who work hard every single day. And we promised things when we were out there on the campaign trail, and so now I'm bringing those promises into the office to make sure that we respond. And a gun enforcement unit is one promise. There is a way in which the AG's office, outside of advocacy in the courts and filing briefs, could be working with our police chiefs and others to educate folks, including advocates, on what their rights are, how they can get a license, how they can't, work with them to get ghost guns off the street, which is a major issue. These are firearms in our communities, and they are prevalent, that are not tracked in any way. And of course, go after those who are hoarding hundreds of guns or illegally selling them. So this unit will be critical to that, and we're beginning to have conversations with folks about how to set that up. The other piece that is just as important, and we're running all of these parallel tracks, people, it's a busy time, but it's very exciting, is a reproductive justice unit. And why is that important? It's not only to make sure that the rights that we have here, and again, kudos to the legislature and others who got ahead of that decision and overturning, of course, the overturning of Roe v. Wade, to say we're going to codify the right to an abortion in our laws here. We're going to go a step further. We're going to make sure that the laws here protect your access to health care plans to cover these reproductive health care services. In addition to that, we are filing, of course, briefs and working with other AGs across the country to make sure we're taking on this Texas matter. There is one other medication that is available for folks who use that type of tool for an abortion. But let's be clear, it's going to take all of us working together. I'm really proud that in my first week on the job, we launched a hotline, an abortion hotline, for folks not only in Massachusetts, but even folks outside of Massachusetts, to call a number to get free, confidential advice and sort of like to know your rights, providers, patients, on what is available to you, how do you access critical healthcare services here. And so kudos to the law firms, Reproductive Equity Now, ACLU, and many others who stepped up to be a part of that. And lastly, I will say
What's
this.
the number before you leave that topic?
It is 833-309-6301. So 833-309-6301.
Yeah,
Free
continue.
and confidential. And lastly, because we live in the best state in America, people should know that the providers here in Massachusetts that are providing these critical healthcare services often go around the country to train folks.
Yeah.
That is critical. So as we think about provider shortages and ways to incentivize folks to really get into this medical field, Massachusetts is leading the way in so many ways. And so we should be excited, just as we, of course, are fighting and pushing back on what's happening in Texas.
You know, by the way, there's been a lot of concern, maybe less so here, but about providers' liability if women come in from other states where the abortion is illegal. What is the deal for providers of abortion in Massachusetts?
For the recent legislation that was passed worked on by our former Attorney General and, of course, folks in the office, as well as the legislature, and signed by our former governor, protects folks. And we have one of the most aggressive laws in the country on that. I do think the question is, how do we work with other AGs and other folks in other states that have lesser protections, because they're going to be coming here. And so how do we use technology, telehealth, and this hotline, for example, and other tools in our toolkit to make sure folks have access to these critical healthcare services and really quickly at moments so they don't risk their lives.
A lot of people interested in talking to you, Attorney General. So let's start with Chris in Boston. You're
All
on
nice calls.
with
It's
Attorney
Valentine's
General
Day.
That's
Andrea
right.
Campbell. Welcome, Chris. You're on with the Attorney General.
Oh, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yep.
can.
Hi.
Oh, okay. Thank you for taking the call. So I saw an article in the Boston Globe this morning regarding the Hinton Drug Lab and former chemist Annie Dukin and some evidence that apparently the Inspector General's office had withheld. I'm not sure if you saw that article, but it looks like the Inspector General's office referred at least 4 other people at the lab for criminal prosecution to the Attorney General's office, either under Coakley or Healy. So, A, are you going to make all those referrals public? B, are those chemists going to be prosecuted? And C, is the former Inspector General Glenn Cluna in any sort of trouble for lying to the public about that for years?
Excellent questions, Chris from Boston. Let's hear what the Attorney General has to say. Could you back up and just explain who Annie Dukin was for those who don't recall?
She was a chemist who worked at that drug lab and was essentially making things up, creating evidence where none existed, and did a lot to, sadly, jeopardize the integrity of many cases. And of course, there was another one who was using the substances. So some major concerns, obviously, continue with respect to their misconduct and gross misconduct. Obviously, this is, Chris, first of all, thank you for the call. This has covered 2 attorneys general before me over 2 previous administrations, so I'm getting a handle on it. I will, of course, continue to follow the guidance of the court, and so that article referenced one recent decision, but there is still decisions that the court has to make in terms of sealing and unsealing various records. But I can say this, the mantra and one value that in the office will always be transparency and justice, frankly. And we have an opportunity when we get more guidance from the court to really look at how do we right the wrongs in these types of cases, how do we be very forthcoming, and how do we go after justice. And so we're waiting for some more guidance, and I need that in order to proceed to the next step.
Can I follow up on a couple of things
Yep.
Chris asked about this? And it is true. The Inspector General just said the quote is that Dukin was the sole bad actor, even though he was at the same time referring Farrak, I think I'm mispronouncing her name, who also was prosecuted, and 3 referrals, which I think it was 3, where there was not a prosecution. A bunch of quick questions. Is the statute of limitations run? If you chose to take a second look at those 3 criminal referrals that did not lead to prosecution and concluded there was cause to prosecute them, is it too late?
We're going to look into it. And I'm careful to say that because why I'm careful to say that is we need more guidance from the court on what we can and can't do. And I have to also add, yes, a month on the job, it covered 2, not just one previous administration, 2, right?
Healy and
You're
Coakley.
talking about almost 20 years. And so we're getting a handle on what the referrals were, what happened, what isn't, what that all is. And then, of course, as we get more guidance from the court, we will proceed in a way that people, I think, will say, oh, this office is about justice.
But one thing it seems to me, feel free to correct me, Attorney General Campbell, that is in your jurisdiction, that is not a decision with the court, is the lawyers, well, it's a court decision too, but I think you have a role in this. The lawyers, it appears from Andrea Campbell's piece in the Globe, for the 3 whose drug samples were tested by the 3 where there were criminal referrals but not prosecutions, want their cases thrown out like tens of thousands of Farraks and Dukans were. You could at least recommend to the court that there be that disposition once you looked into the referrals. Is that something you're at least considering?
We are waiting to see and getting more information on these. And I want to be clear. I am sharing very little right now because we are still just doing that, getting a handle on all of the information. Of course, the Globe has some, and I do read the Globe too, but not always, the facts and the full picture are not always captured in the article. But I will tell you, my goal is only to pursue justice and to do it in a transparent way, but hopefully to actually get this drug lab case, behind us. And so folks have some clear guidance on how they can proceed. So frankly, the next Attorney General who comes next is not talking about this scandal 4 years from now.
We're talking to Andrea Campbell, the new Attorney General of Massachusetts.
Michael in Cambridge, thank you for calling. You're on with the Attorney General.
Hey, Michael.
Yes, thank you very much. Hey, who's in charge?
Hey.
Who's in charge of the photographers, the plainclothes photographers, of law enforcement to take pictures of all of us demonstrators? And who governs the use and archives of their work? You can tell these guys are working for somebody in law enforcement, like the George Floyd, Tyree Nichols, Black Lives Matter, and other demonstrations.
Okay, we heard your question.
Yeah,
How about
I wonder if you're talking about any particular demonstration in Boston, or Michael,
Yeah.
anything specific you're referring to?
The last one I was at, the Tyree Nichols one, which was a small one, not really with a lot of police presence, but the same photographers with their plain clothes, with their backpacks, same type of cameras. They're there photographing all the demonstrators that parade.
Yeah, they
on
could
the
be. They
street.
could
could
be
be
also. They
journalists.
could be photographers
It
from
could
the
be
Globe
Jim
or
and
the
Marjorie,
Herald.
Michael.
Yeah,
Be
I
careful.
mean,
It could be Jim and Marjorie. I don't mean to make light of what you're saying. Obviously, I was on the city council, and anytime there is a protest or folks showing up and marching in the streets to talk about injustice, which they should do in the context of police brutality or anything else. There was some concerns that came up in the context of one protest related to George Floyd about if there was some surveillance happening or going on. So I understand that. I haven't heard any complaints about this. If you have concerns, I always say go to the local police departments, who usually have the authority to actually oversee what's happening for that particular protest, and also who issue the permits.
Michael, thank you for the call.
But I
Can we
also
take
think
I'm
if you're
sorry.
if you're at a protest, I think people can take your picture. You're out on the sidewalk.
Well, I don't think you want law enforcement
No,
surveilling you.
I don't think that.
That-
But
I
I'm
think
that
not
was
sure
his
who's taking.
implication.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I just lift that up because it did come up in one particular context related to one protest when I was still in the city council, and it was addressed quickly by the previous commissioner.
Let's take a question from Catherine, who is at the Boston Public Library, as she approaches the mic to talk to the Attorney General. Catherine, welcome.
Hi, Catherine.
Hi,
Happy Valentine's Day.
thank you, same to you. Yes, my question was about the folks that are in correctional facilities and the high cost of them calling out to their family members. That is such a, what do you call it? It helps them get through their incarceration if
That's
they
right.
can call their family members, but the cost is really prohibitive. So, I shouldn't say most, but a lot of the folks are from poor backgrounds anyway, and that's just an additional cost that shouldn't be there. That should be at least, maybe one call a day is free or something, and then everything else after that maybe, but at least something should be free for them. I used to work at Essex County.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
about
you
it,
for the
Attorney
question. I'm on the record, even before I was Attorney General, as supporting legislation and measures to make those phone calls free. I think they're critical to rehabilitation that is successful. But most importantly, like you just said, it is a burden. And if we say we want to have our folks who are behind the wall have access to family members or other supports that are critical to rehabilitation, then we should make that easier. And there are many folks in law enforcement, including in corrections, who support this. The governor, who was then the Attorney General, also supported this. But I would just add, and I appreciate the question, I care deeply about prison reform, criminal legal reform. I was just saying this last night at an event where someone asked the question, but for you being in the role and being in a particular position, what would be lost, or what would you advocate for? What issue do you sort of carry on your back that you are a champion for? And for me, it's always been prison reform. And that's connected to just my personal narrative of having almost every loved one, mother, father, twin brother, die or be connected to the prison system. Most of my meetings in my first month have been internal, rightfully so. So there are a lot of external requests, and I'm saying, we will get to you. I need to meet with my staff and all the folks who work hard across all our 4 offices. But one request I did approve and go to was meeting with some men at MCI Norfolk Prison. There were hundreds there, and it was a part of not just Black History Month, but also the work this coalition is doing to change laws and policies to really address the disparities that exist in our prison system, and was excited to be there. And after leaving that meeting, have some real advocacy to do, including around this issue. And one thing I will just add, these issues that we talk about are not just affecting people of color. It's not a person of color or a community of color issue. This affects everybody in many ways. And as we incarcerate or criminalize those who have mental health issues or who are on who have a substance use disorder, you will see that readily in communities all across the Commonwealth, including in our rural communities. And I also see it as an example of disparities that you see in the system, public corruption, abuse of power, and there's a real way to make a difference from the Attorney General's office. So I added a lot there because it's a set of issues I will absolutely champion. And thank you for your advocacy.
Speaking of something you'll champion, I believe it was in your, right after you were sworn in, you said and you said in the campaign, one of the things you wanted to use the Attorney General's office to address was the wealth gap that I think everybody listening to the show has memorized, those grotesque figures from the Federal Reserve. We've talked to Lee Pelton from the Boston Foundation, who's involved in that Fed work to relook at those numbers. I think it was the Barr Foundation the other day announced they're giving $750,000 to the Globe to put reporters on to look into the issue. What can the Attorney General do around wealth gap issues?
So much.
Like what?
I can't wait to begin. I'm getting to it. So outside of the traditional ways in which we think about the office, some still say top cop, chief law enforcement officer. Yes, that is true. Enforce our laws with a sense of urgency, protect our residents, protect our kids. So there are several priorities, but this idea of really building economic prosperity and stability is absolutely going to be a theme for the office. And the office is doing that already in many ways. We've already dealt with, and I've dealt with, so many cases dealing with wage theft. People actually going to work and not getting paid their wages by their employer. That's a major issue in Massachusetts, not just in the construction industry where you hear it. It's restaurants, it's small businesses, it's many larger employers not paying their workers. That disproportionately affects, of course, immigrants, people of color, or low-income residents who desperately need those wages. That's not only putting money back in the pockets of residents, but it's creating economic stability for them. I'm also looking at housing. We know that that is a tool to help you build your wealth for the next generation and the generation after that. We have a neighborhood renewal division in the office that uses receivership powers and other powers to work with municipalities to look at blighted properties in your community to turn that into homeownership opportunities. I did that work when I was on the city council. We can absolutely do it in more municipalities and really look at communities of color, for example, as a way to close that racial wealth gap, get assets into the hands of those residents. In addition to that, housing could be more at the forefront. As we protect folks to keep tenants in their homes, for example, that for me is building wealth. That is about economics. As we are pushing back on potential legal foreclosures, which is a major concern of folks, that is also creating economic stability for folks, especially our elders. So there's a whole host of ways. And then I'll end with this. I'm even looking to hire someone who will own that sort of portfolio of work around closing that gap and building economic prosperity. And I don't know that any AG office in the country is really driving that home. But discrimination, the way in which we praise houses, the value of homes, appraisal rates, significant discrimination largely against black residents or black families. The president and the federal government have looked at this. So there's a whole host of ways to really build wealth for folks. And it's about the framing.
Attorney General, you just talked about people not getting their wages. Give us an example. You don't have to use names, obviously, but just how it happens that you show up for work on Monday, payday comes on Friday, you don't get paid. Give us a story. How does this? Give us an example of how this happens.
So there's a couple. Well, one recently, a case we resolved, a local employer right here in Boston, where we got, usually it's a complaint that comes from either a worker who, through a hotline or email or something like that. The hardworking investigators in the office go out, sometimes from the Fair Labor Division or other parts of the office, to go out and investigate, and they look into an employer. And in this particular case, this employer wasn't keeping adequate records, which usually is the case, isn't paying wages. So we'll look at, okay, where are the timesheets? Maybe you're not keeping those, or if you do have those, you're actually not paying folks according to what they worked. So there's a whole host of ways to investigate and get to the bottom of when an employer is not doing what they're required to do legally. And then, of course, we're fighting really hard to put money back in the pockets of those workers. But also, in addition to doing that, because everything I want to do in this economic stability space is the money should be going to the workers, to the consumer. But how do we also deter behavior? So there's all types of agreements we can come up with employers. Some may just need to be shut down. Others, I think sometimes if it's a smaller business, it's an honest mistake, or they just didn't know what they were doing, we can educate them, we can do technical assistance, make the employee whole, while at the same time making sure the employer going forward gets it right.
Let's see if we can squeeze in another one before the first break. Let's go to Brian calling from a car. You're on with Attorney General Andrea Campbell.
Calling
Welcome.
from where?
A car.
A car.
Oh, a car.
A car. Hey, Brian.
Be safe.
Yes.
What's up?
Hello there.
Hi.
Hi. Can you
Hi.
hear me?
Yep.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for taking my call. I'm a long-time listener, first-time caller.
Thank you.
And happy to talk to the Attorney General. I have a somewhat complicated question it's related to health insurance. I'm disabled. I lost my leg to cancer about 15 years ago, and I'm good now, but I use a prosthesis and have gotten probably 3 times in the last 10 years, I've gotten a third-party company on behalf of my insurance company sending me a questionnaire about my leg, saying, asking a bunch of questions which lead me to believe they're looking for a way not to pay the claim because they want to know if it's a workers' comp claim or if it was due to an accident, like a car accident or something like that, not related to what they would have to pay. And I've answered those like 2 or 3 times in the last 10 years. And this past year, I decided I'm just going to ignore the questionnaire that they sent because it's pretty lengthy and takes a significant amount of time to fill out. And they already have this information. So I didn't fill it out last year. And that led to them pulling back a claim. I had a test done, ordered by my doctor.
Hey, Brian, can I interrupt you for 1 second?
Yes, you may.
You may. No, if you have a question, you should ask it. If not, with all due respect, Attorney General, what we've done in prior situations like Brian's
I have someone here.
is get the contact.
Yes.
And is that?
Yep.
We came prepared, and also I just want to acknowledge Lauren, who's here,
Great.
who manages like all of the hotlines. So when you call the office, her team is on the front lines, not only making sure someone picks up, but that you get a response and your case is resolved. So just stay on the line, and we'll get your contact, Brian. And when you circle back, please, don't be in a car. We might need some more information from you, but we'll follow up and make sure that we respond.
Brian, stay on hold. One of our producers will get the contact information and pass it along.
Thanks
and thank
for calling,
you for your
Brian.
first call. We appreciate it.
We're with Attorney General Andrea Campbell. She's going to be with us to the top of the hour. You can reach her at 877-301-8970. You can call or text. We'll get to as many as we possibly can. You're listening to Boston Public Radio, live from the Boston Public Library.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Browdy and Marge Regan. We're live at the Boston Public Library, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. We're here for the inaugural visit of Andrea Campbell, the new Attorney General of Massachusetts.
On Valentine's Day.
For Ask the Attorney General. She'll be with us monthly. And by the way, if you want even more of her at the end of this hour, she's going to be with Callie on Basic Black on Friday night. Do not miss that. So you were just smiling during the break, and I assume you were smiling because you're with me and Marjorie, but it wasn't that. Why were you smiling?
No,
Andrea
Mr.
Campbell?
Red. So most.
Mr. Red was your teacher?
Yeah. So most folks know I went to 5 Boston public schools, and I always talk about it just how I had a high quality public education. And Mr. Red was one of my teachers. So when I came in, I was like, "Hey, how are you doing?"
Oh my goodness!
Mr.
So he's
Red
sitting
asked
over
the
there.
question on behalf of Greer during the Ask the Mayor. Let's hear it from Mr. Red, actually.
So he's like
That's
ducking
great.
down. I don't know why. You should be proud.
That's great.
So, on a much more somber note, we get a lot of, this is a text from Steve in Plymouth. He wants to know how come the state police scufflaws are allowed to keep their pensions after they falsify their timesheets. This leaves the public with a distrust issue. Obviously, not just the state police that people are distrustful of. We have problems up at Springfield. The Department of Justice is looking into them involving a consent decree. Worcester, some cases involving excessive force. We had a gentleman call a couple of weeks ago, was a piece in the Globe actually, black guy been pulled over 70 times by the cops. We talked to Mayor Wu earlier today about problems on the Boston police force with police officers that have been, in one case, fired twice. They get reinstated by arbitration. The city has to pay these enormous civil suits to the people that they mistreated. In this case, one of them was the guy that's now the commissioner, Michael Cox. But you're the Attorney General, but where is your role in terms of policing in Massachusetts, with the state cops or the local cops?
It's significant, and most folks would think in the traditional way you think about an AG. One is, within the office itself, there is a state police unit. I have two here who are part of my detail.
Good guys, great guys
They're
over
great
there.
guys.
Great guys over there.
They are great guys, and they work really hard, and they're dedicated and passionate about service and about the jobs they do, and they don't just drive me around and protect me. They also have open cases, so they are investigating what's happening in our casinos. They are investigating everything related to the opioid crisis, the trafficking of fentanyl and everything else. All types of cases. A huge crim bureau, and the state police is housed within that bureau. Doing a lot to protect us, human trafficking, white-collar crime, you name it. If anything, the unit is severely understaffed, and yet they show up every single day to work extra hours. So I want to give credit, because at the end of the day, when I used to be on the city council, I chaired the Committee on Public Safety and Criminal Justice. I would say at 2 a.m. when someone is harmed in my community, I'm not calling the mayor or a counselor, I'm calling 911 and the police, and hoping someone shows up to respond appropriately and with the highest of integrity and standards of excellence. What we also know, while we have that conversation, that there are still flaws that exist in policing here in Massachusetts. And the office has been involved in some cases of abuse or misconduct by officers. In addition to that, obviously, misappropriation of funds or anything else that violates community trust should be dealt with. So I promised during the campaign, and this is something we're actively working on right now, to not only set up that gun enforcement unit, which is just as important as this other unit, which is the police accountability unit. So I am gearing up to have meetings with not only unions, police chiefs, and others to say, why we look at Tyree Nichols, and that happens outside of Massachusetts. Here in Massachusetts, racial profiling, misappropriation of funds, abuse of power also happens here. And all those cases don't necessarily show up in a public space or where an article is written. But the last I checked, good officers want that dealt with too. And so if we establish this police accountability unit within the AG's office, my goal is to work with law enforcement to quickly root out those folks who abuse their power and make sure not only do they not get their jobs back, but in some instances that they go to jail. And I think sometimes that's difficult to get that level of justice, but it's important. And then I will just add, POST is a major tool that the AG's office will have to play a role in. This is the whole decertification process of an officer. I think there's a greater role the AG's office can play working with the Post Commission to make sure those
Tell
who
people
have
what that is. That's part of the police reform legislation.
That's exactly right. So if an officer has to go through a process of being certified, but if there are certain examples of misconduct or something else, they can be decertified, which bars them from working as a police officer or in law enforcement here in Massachusetts and maybe elsewhere too. And so this Post Commission is critical. But looking at it, we have to make sure it's resourced. We have to make sure that the AG's office has the tools to help the Post Commission execute on any decertifications and to make sure those who abuse their power, and we have examples of that, are never allowed to work in law enforcement ever again.
Let's go back to the calls. The Attorney General of the Commonwealth, Andrea Campbell, is with us till the top of the hour. Judy in Andover, you're on next with Andrea Campbell. Welcome.
Thank you very much. So first of all, I'd like to thank the Attorney General for coming to our Greater Andover Indivisible meeting back in October. It was great to meet her in person and to hear from her, and congratulations on her win.
Thank you.
But my question is, what can the Attorney General's office do to rein in the so-called crisis pregnancy centers that are giving out misinformation and disinformation to pregnant women that are fraudulently claiming themselves to be medical centers, although they have no clinical certifications whatsoever. I'll leave the question there.
Thank you, and thank you for the question and also for the support. And obviously, with what Andover, I was on the phone with some folks, of course, in Andover, given what happened recently. So a lot of trauma in the community, but it's great to hear your voice. A lot. And so when I talk about this Reproductive Justice Unit that we are working on setting up, we just actually, if we didn't post it yesterday, it will be this week, job description to hire someone to build out, to start that unit and to build it out. And the hotline, of course, was a way for folks to come and ask questions. But on the crisis pregnancy centers, the office has been doing a lot. It issued an advisory even before I became AG, and to warn folks on these centers that put themselves out there as providing abortion or other critical health care services, but aren't actually doing that. Maybe even some data privacy concerns with respect to these centers. And so as we continue the work, the unit and others in the office will be tasked with looking at what other laws can we use to take on folks who are violating this advisory or in some way preying on consumers and not giving them the information they need. And I think there are several legal theories. You won't want to hear all those, but there are several legal theories that the office is already reviewing to be able to take it a step further. And I'm hopeful and optimistic that the lawyers in the office, but also this new unit, will be able to do that and couple it with all the other pieces as well.
You know, it's just staying on a police thing in a related matter. I think most people listening to the show have heard about Justin Root, who had a history of mental illness, was shot by a police officer at outside Brigham and Women's. He then drove, I think, into Brookline and ultimately was killed by a police officer there. The Norfolk DA at an earlier time determined there was no basis for criminal charges being filed against any police officer. And just yesterday, the Suffolk County DA determined the same thing. Family members, both before yesterday and I believe yesterday, are saying they want you, they say Justin was actually a constituent of yours when you were a city councilor, they want you in the Attorney General's office to do an independent investigation. Are you open to that? Are you considering that?
We are in conversations with his sister. So I actually was in conversations with his sister when I was still on the city council. And we share in the fact that obviously this was her brother. I've lost a brother and felt like there was no accountability, no justice, because I never knew what happened and no one was ever held accountable for Andre's passing. And of course, that was in the context of the Department of Correction. This is different. And so we are actively in conversations to see what we can do.
Fair enough. Let's go to Christina in Taunton. You're on with the Attorney General. Welcome.
Hi, Attorney General Andrea Campbell. Thank you for taking my call. Can you hear me okay?
We can,
Yes.
perfectly.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. The reason I'm calling is I'm not sure if you're aware, but there has been a shortage of the ADA medication known as Adderall. And I'm just wondering if you're aware of it and if there's any work being done to, I guess, alleviate the shortage. I've been taking this medication for about 20 years, and to be honest, I wake up every morning thinking about it. Try and call various CVS's, to see if they have it. Everybody's out of stock. Nobody even wants to take their call anymore. I can't even imagine how parents of children with ADHD are dealing with this because you can't just take a medication like this for years and then just stop with nothing else to, no substitute. I'm sorry. I'm thinking beyond myself here because I know how it affects me, and I can't imagine being a parent of a child with ADHD.
So let's do this. Let's get your contact. So I would say do not hang up. Let's get your contact. We will follow up today to talk in more detail about this, which is similar to the Tylenol shortage and other, breastfeeding formula and other things that have come up. And I think from a policy stance, so I think there's some things the office can do. It also connects, I think, to the price gouging conversation that's also come up. So let's get your contact information. I appreciate you calling in. I appreciate your vulnerability your advocacy for yourself, but also other families. And we'll follow up today.
Christina, don't hang up. We'll get your number and we'll pass it on immediately to the
Okay.
Attorney General's colleagues. Thank you for your call.
Attorney General James from Boston wants to know about progress being made with CORI reform. He says that even people with not guilty or dismissed charges still get jobs denied, and he's it's difficult for him to get clean because he's having trouble getting a job.
Yep, that's a major issue, and I want to give credit, whether it's Greater Boston Legal Services, ACLU, or other advocates who still do know your rights. When I used to be on the board for the Mass Black Lawyer Association, they did know your rights, so people knew exactly what their rights were. And sometimes it can be a little complicated given your individual case or relationship with an employer as a candidate. And so there is more to do in that space. And so when I mentioned the Police Accountability Unit earlier, I want to take a step back. The office is not just going out to focus on government accountability or abuse of power or public corruption in the context of just police officers. This shows up in different contexts. And so we are actually in the process of creating what we're calling an internal working group on government accountability, looking at how we set up that Police Accountability Unit, looking at how we set up the gun enforcement unit, but also looking at what we can do in the context of criminal legal reform. That's a big issue. CORI is one issue under criminal legal reform where an AG's office can absolutely show up boldly and fiercely, just like we call employers in the context of wage theft. The same can be true for CORI, but also showing up, just like I said to the folks housed at MCI Norfolk, showing up at the State House on legislation to help folks in terms of reentry, showing up in the context of other issues to address the racial disparities that exist, not only in before you're incarcerated, but also when you get out, and making sure that folks are not discriminated against.
Grant, I'm
Grant
sorry.
from Belmont. Thank you for calling, Grant.
Hi, Grant.
Hi, Grant.
Thank you, Jim and Hi, thank you, Jim and Marjorie. Madam Attorney General, in recent weeks, the state's Cannabis Control Commission announced that they referred at least one case to your office for parallel investigation. Coupled with the news we've heard that the industry is facing Russian oligarch financing and the death of employees, do you support creating an independent OIG unit to oversee the CCC? Thank you.
Thanks, Grant.
Thank you for the question. I can't respond yes or no just yet because I think we have to look into it more. You hear about issues in terms of, and I know right now the office is looking into many investigations into folks who are setting up shop here who may not even be from this country, trying to take advantage of these economic opportunities, which we know, if done right, could really be an opportunity to close the racial wealth gap. And so we'll look into it more, and I'm sure I'll have a response in more detail on it later.
You know, when you
But I will add, since it's oversight, and I remember being on the council in proposed Office of Inspector General for the city of Boston, and some folks were against it. I was in favor of it because I thought, yes, we have a state inspector general who can look at a whole bunch of things, and an auditor and others, but sometimes at the municipal level, it's not a bad idea. So clearly not against oversight if it is for, because there's a lack of human capital to do it at a local level or within a particular agency, or there's bias or something else that may exist.
You know, I'm going to get this mostly right, but maybe not 100%. When you called in on election day, as virtually all the candidates did, one of us asked you a question about the significance of, should you win, which you did, being not just the first black woman attorney general, but the first black woman constitutional officer, statewide office holder. And you said something incredible to me, like, you're smiling. So, frankly, I never thought of it until a reporter mentioned it to me the other day. I accept that as truthful. So I assume
Yes,
you've had
it's truthful.
I'm
I don't
sure
lie.
it is. I know you don't. I assume you've had time to think about it. This is a long time coming. You're nodding in agreement. Yeah. Tell us what your thoughts are now that you are the Attorney General.
Yes, I have had time to think about what it means to be the first black woman attorney general in Massachusetts, the first woman of color to win statewide office in Massachusetts. And I take that responsibility very seriously. I think that maybe the first time it really hit me, this was before the inauguration. The inauguration, of course, it hits you. But before then, I had gone into the office as AG-elect to meet with the attorneys and the staff and everyone who works there to say hello, to introduce myself, and this is when Maura was still there. And you walk in, and you see Maura's picture, which was in color. You see Martha, which was black and white, and all the other pictures before it. And there was some on the left, maybe the older gentlemen, of all mainly white men. Then you walk further down and you can see former Senator Brooke. That's when it hit me. Now my photo is up. It is a very beautiful photo. And I have to say this because people are like, that photo is great. And the photographer did a wonderful job. And of course, it was like no hair out of place. It was all perfect. But because it's historic. And so that's when it really hit me, the magnitude of what it means and what it means to be present in the room. And we say representation matters. The presence in the room matters. As I looked at the students this morning at my son's school, and I talked about, and his teacher talked about the first black woman, you see the little black girls light up. They didn't say anything, but you could see it in their eyes. And you see it with everybody else. And I know I'm here because Massachusetts residents put me here as far as Berkshire County. And I will say pockets of the state that we view or deem to be red, where people are like, you really shouldn't show up there. I showed up anyway. Because I said, do Massachusetts residents live there? They do. Okay, I don't care which way they're leaning. They live there, I'm going to engage. And many of those parts of the state that I guess we had no business winning, we did. And so I give the credit to the voters. And I think going forward, you're seeing, I think, understanding from constituents and voters that who you elect matters, but most importantly, a desire to have elected and political leadership in this political industry represent the people we serve and represent their stories. And so for me, this work will always be really fighting for those folks that feel left out and left behind, unseen, unheard, and doing it with a sense of urgency, compassion, and empathy. So do I feel it now? Yes. And when I engage with AGs all across the country, because right now there are only 2 elected black women AGs, Tish James in New York, me, and before that there was only Kamala Harris, who was the AG in New York. It matters. And it still matters at the national level, and of course, given how progressive we are in many ways in Massachusetts when it comes to our laws, it really matters. And so thank you to Massachusetts, and thank you to our residents for putting me here to have the best job in the world. And I told Maura, but I would say it to Biden if I saw him, I have the best job in government.
Okay, we have a couple of text messages for you, Attorney General.
We only
First
have
of
a
all,
couple of seconds.
your neighbor Becky is coming by with Hershey bars to celebrate your crushing it
wait,
here.
who?
And your neighbor
Becky.
Oh,
Do you
yeah,
know
she
Becky's-
drops off chocolate.
Yeah, she's
My
got the
God.
Hershey bars.
Okay, happy Valentine's Day.
John from Rhode Island, he's a not so recent law school grad. He says he's inspired by you. He wants to know, how does he become an awesome public law figure like yourself, A.G. Campbell?
Well, do well in law school, graduate, and then go into public service. And there are a whole host of jobs and opportunities, including interning in various offices. But don't give up on public service. It can be hard because student debt is real, but we need good lawyers and we need good folks going into government.
Well,
We want to thank you
very much.
so much for being.
Thank
And
you
by the
very much
way,
for being here.
again, Andrea Campbell will be on Basic Black Friday night at 7:30 on GBH2, and she'll be back with us next month. Great to see you.
Thank you.